who conveniently just dropped a 27 elim win in the solo cash cup finals. So I'm going to break down every single fighting strategy he used across every single one of those elims. Mr. Savage decides to land at Spaghetti Grotto and immediately grabs a shotgun off spawn and then uses the wind tunnel here to W key. He doesn't actually drop down, he instead follows the other player who is still gliding in. Now, because the other player landed first, this means he's getting keyed by some of the guards that are around here, which creates an opening for Mr. Savage to start the fight. He has no mats, but since he's a shotgun, he can repeatedly just right-hand sprint peek the other player, picking up an easy elim. Now, since he had the shotgun, he immediately had the advantage in a close-range, no-material fight, but had he left some time to grab some more materials and maybe get some shield and a spray weapon or something, the other player would have also done the same, so he would have lost this advantage. This also means that he can immediately wipe out Eminem and grab his minigun, can't believe that's a sentence I actually just said, before any other players from the surrounding drop spots can push in. This is also important because once you knock out the bosses in these POIs, all the other bots decide to stop keying you, so you don't have to worry about them shooting you and wasting shield, and you can automatically open any of these henchman chests too, giving Savage the best loot possible in a very short period of time. Now, there is actually one more player contesting here, Dr. MX Molecules 20. Oh, it's Dr. Molecule. Okay, we figured it out. We got there. Clearly, Savage has the weapon advantage here. So after a single shot from the tag, he just easily finishes off.
I mean, that guy wasn't drawn, bro. He was literally wearing the
every single player in the POI. Completely free access to the vault, and with the guaranteed llama that spawns in here, plus all of the other chests, he's now completely capped materials with basically the best loot in the entire game. So he takes this insane loot into the wind tunnel and pushes towards Retail Row. Now here, Mr. Savage does a mechanic using the grappler that a ton of other pros use. As he drops from the zipline, he grapplers the floor and then slide jumps to keep the forward momentum going. This is a mechanic that we will see a lot in this match. The other mechanic Savage uses a ton here is the grappler cancel, where when approaching this fight in Retail Row, he grapples and then immediately switches to a shotgun, which allows him to shoot or build without being stuck in the grappler animation. This specific cancel allows him to keep height over the opponent, and from there he immediately places a ton of cones and floors to try and create some extra control over the opponent. This is unfortunately unsuccessful as the other player disengages, but this is where the RG minigun comes into play. Now, what makes this minigun so overpowered is that each bullet deals 21 damage to players, but it has a 50% damage buff when used on structures. This means that it deals 252 damage per second to players, but 396 damage per second to structures. Because it deals such a high amount of structure damage, Savage can just use this easily to jump and spray into the other players 2x1, ensuring to fall into the box next to the opponent rather than landing directly inside the box where the player is. Had he just attempted to jump into the box where the opponent was, he easily could have died in a 50-50 fight, so he sprays into the box next to the opponent to attempt to grab the wall between both of the players to give himself a build piece to play around, but unfortunately he isn't fast enough and the opponent grabs this piece. For a lot of people, this would be a rough spot to be stuck in, but
we're going to talk about me getting slapped in the mid-air while I'm jumping in the box.
Savage places a ramp and a cone above him when he doesn't get the wall. Now, most people in the opponent's situation would try to just edit and cone Savage to box him in, and then you have him fully boxed. So by Savage placing this cone above his head, he allows him to escape a tricky spot way ahead of the other player trying to do this. Now, at this point, the other player...
We're not going to talk about me going all the way up there, so if he was holding the floor, then I would phase through
far too many boxes. So this fight is just going to take far too long.
If I didn't do that, I would have died right there.
Continuing this because it's just going to attract a lot of other people to third party, and unsurprisingly, it already has. So Savage decides to key this player instead. Now he uses the grapple cancel again to close the gap and build a couple walls to protect himself, but notice how he positions himself behind this player, as this then positions this opponent between himself and the first player who was trying to fight. This means that if the original player does decide to third party, Savage isn't going to get shot, and instead he can use this pressure to his advantage to finish the fight quickly over this new player. However, none of this was needed, as he simply just replaces the wall with a minigun, then hits the max damage with the gold shotgun, then finishes the player off with a minigun. As the fire rate is just so high, he's guaranteed to get some damage to the walls and kill him instantly. Now the original player sees that this fight has ended and decides to leave all of these boxes behind and push what he thinks is a weak Mr. Savage. But this is again where the loot advantage that Savage has benefits him massively. The other player hits him for 50, so he creates a ton of boxes to play defensively from. The opponent gets straight into the box that he's actually standing in, but Savage is able to one pump him with a little pump max. Now this opponent only has a green pump, but had he had a blue, then Savage would have almost definitely lost this fight or maybe traded, as he was only left with with 15 HP. So the quick looting off spawn definitely benefited him in multiple fights. Another really important thing he does is check these vending machines really frequently, because often you can get really good heals from them. You can see in here it's 100 metal for a big, so you can just get that completely capped up, and then he ends up rotating to yet another rift to find another player to W key. I'd like to add something of interest here, but he basically just hears two players fighting and then just slide jumps in with the minigun, and yeah, gets an easy kill. Now on approach to his 6th victim, he ends up grappling up on height and actually gets hit for around 50 damage, so he creates a box to heal from. When he then sees the opponent is getting aggressive with his wall, he creates a second box in hard mats, and notice how he plays in the middle of these two boxes. This essentially gives him access to any of the walls surrounding him, and he can hug this middle wall to create a nice right hand peek. So when the other player drops onto his wall, you can see how the opponent is going for the brick wall. However, he edits the wood wall and we'll be able to get a nice shot behind him. Now he goes to double cone, but unfortunately does overextend a little bit and ends up trading damage here. But this 100 damage shot opens up the fight nicely and just allows him, after popping 2 minis, to get on height and just kill the guy with the minigun, because, you know, this gun's super balanced. Now Elim's 7 and 8 are, you know, super skillful, and there's lots to break down here. But when he starts to fight the 9th opponent, there's actually a really interesting thing he does here. Notice how he gets pumped all the way down to 25 HP, but he's actually dealt a ton of damage, so both players are really weak. A lot of players in this situation where they've already dealt this much damage would be like, oh, the minigun will get some bleed through damage, I can just spray into his box and kill him. But that's exactly how you die doing this strategy. Any HP where you can just easily get one pumped, it is absolutely not worth just to fully spray into someone's box. And Savage knows that, so he ends up just spending the time healing up before, you know, continuing to do the same thing again. Now, the next fight, the exact same thing happens when he's fighting Middle East Pro Fahad. So he boxes up and heals, but Fahad is disengaging as he's getting sprayed by the M&M NPC. But after healing, he does the exact same thing as he did in the previous fight, and that was to double spray into the box next to the player. However, this time he's successful in grabbing the wall between both of them. From here, he places a cone to stand on and one above his head to escape, similar to that fight earlier in the game. And then because Fahad is on the right side of the wall, any edit he makes here is going to be a bad edit. If he edits something on the right, he's going to be in the open. If he makes a window, basically almost regardless of what edit he makes, it's going to be a bad one that Fahad is going to be able to capitalize on here. So he just makes a peanut butter edit peek, which gives Fahad the peek, slides a cone in, and this big open edit that he's made makes Fahad think he's going to get an easy shot off, so that baits him to shoot his pump shot. However, Mr. Savage has already scroll resetted and is holding the wall at this point, so as Fahad shoots, the wall breaks, Mr. Savage holds it, and then he can basically just make whatever edit he wants, because Fahad has some shotgun delay before he can shoot his next shot, which allows him to easily finish the fight. Baiting out the other player to shoot their shotgun like this is what I like to call pump locking, because basically at this point there's absolutely nothing they can do to deal damage to you. So you can just basically make whatever edit you want, whichever one is the easiest that actually allows you to hit a big damage shot, which is often the top row, and then you can guaranteed hit a big shot on them, because again, they can't shoot you back. Fight number 11 is, I mean, you probably guessed it at this point. But fight number 12 has some really interesting grapple cancel tech. As you notice, your Savage grapple cancels towards this player who's boxed up and switches to his minigun and uses the increased speed he has to slide through the wall and get straight into the box. Now, obviously, a minigun deals a ton of structure damage, so this makes it infinitely easier to do, but you can do this with pretty much any spray gun if the wall is weak enough. Now, Elim 13 may also just be a minigun fiasco, but one thing he does really interesting in this is as he's getting into the box, notice he's watching the other player and he sees the player run straight towards him on a left-hand peek. This is because the opponent is going to do like a bottom 3 or a bottom 4 tile edit and basically just run straight at Mr. Savage. So to counter this, notice how he also swings to his right, which means as the player runs outside of this edit, his line of sight is actually cut off by his own wall and he ends up pumping it. Now, if you just had your shotgun out, this wouldn't be a particularly good play because, again, the other player still has a right-hand peek. But because Mr. Savage has the minigun, he can just easily spray through the freshly edited wall and get more damage off on the other player. Now, this minigun seems pretty overpowered. Who would have thought? It shoots 252 damage a second. No way. So how do you actually counter a strategy like this? Well, notice every single time someone runs away, it's the easiest thing to kill them ever because it deals so much damage through structures. But notice how as soon as Savage gets pumped by a big shot, he has to box up, he has to heal up, and he loses that ability of pressure. So the only way to really actually counter this is just to counter aggression with aggression. If you see someone spraying into your box like this and they just aggressively W key with such a high fire rate weapon, you have to go straight onto the aggressive again. You have to deal some sort of big pump damage and then
you need to just run out with your
to pressure them back. There's no way you're ever going to out pressure a guy with a minigun, and there's no way you're going to be able to escape either. So you basically just have to commit to the fight. Now, the next two eliminations are, you know, pretty much exactly the same as what we've seen already, but elimination 18 would be a perfect time to do another shotgun lock. As Savage approaches this wall, he approaches from a left-hand peek, but it's also on kind of those weird layers where it's stuck half into the ground and the tile isn't exactly in the right place. So from here, there's literally zero edits he can make that will actually give him a right-hand peek to the other player. So a good general rule of thumb is if you're approaching an edit from a left-hand peek, or you're on one of these half awkward edits where there's literally no edit that you can make, which is a good one, this is the perfect time to do a fake scroll wheel reset and bait out the shot of the other player, because there's just no way that you're not going to take damage regardless of what edit you choose. Now the 9th zone, the first moving zone, ends up going towards Mrsavage. This is a perfect time to go up on height. Now usually things are kind of way too early to try and maintain height in a solo cash cup game, because through the first and second moving zones, a ton of players are going to try and look up, chop you out, do a bunch of other stuff, and essentially you just grief your entire game by trying to take height this early. But he is the minigun. So since he's at the front side of the zone, everyone's going to grapple towards him. Just allows him to get a really free elim on a player flying through the sky. But as anticipated, because it's so early into the moving zones, people just grapple up onto his head and he gets hit for a max pump shot and he's forced to change layers. Now luckily, after he heals here with his campfire and some minis, there's another player on his layer who's also weak, so he's easily able to get yet another minigun elim, and this gets him back up to completely capped materials to play out the rest of the endgame. Now unsurprisingly, we're going to see another visual of why height is so grief this early into the game. That's when another player sees that height is free, so he cranks up and he thinks he's safe, but no, Savage just grapples up, hits him with a max damage, and then takes height from him yet again. So just in the first moving zone, you can see how many different transitions there's been up on high ground already, and why it's really just not worth it to take it this early if you actually want to win a solo cash cup game. Savage also does something really smart by trying to follow the guy that he beamed down, not only because he's weak and gets a free elim, but because this player is someone who's consistently looking up for height, which means he probably has good materials, so getting a refresh onto him means you'll be completely capped. But he's unable to follow him, so he goes back up onto height, and guess what? He's chopped yet again. After minigunning into yet another player's box, he then gets an incredibly beautiful kill for number 22. The player tries to wall replace him because he sees all the extra loot in here, but Savage is able to hold this wall. He also places a ramp to get 2 layers of protection between himself, just in case that player did manage to actually get the wall from him. However, because he's got 2 layers of protection between him, the other player doesn't think Savage can edit on him, so he goes for another wall replace. But Savage just does a really nice quick double edit, which catches the other opponent with his pickaxe out, and of course hits the max damage to finish off the player. Now after a questionable height retake, the 11th zone starts moving, and when Savage looks up, high player is just in wood. Now this is the perfect time to try and retake height, because most of the players in lobby aren't going to have many materials left coming into this part of the zone, so if you have plenty like Savage does, the chance of another player actually being able to take height from you is extremely low. Plus the height guy's in wood, so it's the freest chop out of his life. But he makes a mistake and goes too far to the front side and doesn't watch his back and gets absolutely lasered down to no shield. But here he repeats exactly what he did in an earlier fight, and that's create a 2x1, and as the player approaches the one wall, he goes for a pre-edit shot which damages them, and then sprints round to the other box, edits out, cones the opponent with a wall in between, and hits a beautiful max to wipe him out. After yet again chopping out another height player, a pink horse steals height from him, so he ends up dropping down to low. But from here he actually makes a really crucial mistake. He does a really good job trying to bait out the other opponent with scroll resets, but when he actually gets a nice right hand peek onto the other player here, you think that he's moving right and the other player is moving left, so it's all going to be fine, he has the advantage. But he gets hit first. Now the reason this happens is because Savage is actually walking backwards and to the right, which walks much slower than if you just walk to the right with the right double movement settings, and the other player is walking forwards and to the left. So despite the fact that Savage actually has a right hand peek, because he's walking backwards, he's moving slower than the other player, and because of desync, the player who usually moves faster into a peak actually gets a visual advantage first. If you don't understand desync, I'm going to do a full video on it at some point, but basically if you walk quickly into a peak, you get the advantage even if it's a left hand peak. He is however able to kill this player as they mantle onto the roof and he edits him in, and I'm not gonna lie, he uses all of his mats to cover as much space as possible, but has 30 HP and 0 builds remaining. Mrsavage should lose this, but the guy on height unfortunately just seems to utterly choke, and I imagine it's because he has 0 earned in total, and this would have been his first earnings, so he's probably quite nervous, so Savage ends up